para mí presentarles al doctor Claus Siebe, que nos va a presentar a través de su charla magistral como un recorrido por el campo volcánico de Michoacán-Guanajuato y los conocimientos actuales y los retos a futuros. Creo que muchos de los que están aquí ya conocen muy bien a Claus, porque hemos tenido la oportunidad de tenerlo como profesor, como asesor, como colega, como amigo. Sin embargo, me voy a permitir leer una muy breve semblanza de Claus. Él estudió geología en Tübingen, en Alemania, y el doctorado en vulcanología en Arizona State University, bajo la tutela de Michael Sheridan. Es vulcanólogo del Instituto de Geofísica de la UNAM desde el 1991. Primeramente trabajó sobre distintos aspectos de estratovolcanes en México, especialmente en el Popocatépetl, y posteriormente notó la importancia que tiene el vulcanismo monogenético en el cinturón volcánico transmexicano. Sus estudios se han enfocado en campo volcánico Michoacán-Guanajuato desde el año 2007, donde ha dirigido tesis de estudiantes y guiado las investigaciones de varios investigadores postdoctorales. Ha divulgado los resultados de sus estudios en más de 80 artículos del Site Citation Index, haciendo un énfasis en su utilidad para la planeación urbana y territorial, así como la protección civil. Es aficionado a la arqueología y ornitología y ha pasado desde su infancia la mayor parte de sus vacaciones con su familia en una casita en el hermoso municipio de Jungapeo, al oriente de Michoacán. Entonces me da mucho gusto presentar ahorita, dar la palabra a Claus, que además es uno de los principales promotores del evento que nos reúne el día de hoy aquí. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Lucía. Buenos días a todos. Es un honor para mí poder estar frente a ustedes y pues sin mayor preámbulo creo que debo de dar la charla en inglés, pero o sea como ustedes gusten. This is going to be the outline of my talk. Essentially, I'm going to give you a brief historic perspective, and then I will talk a little bit about present and future studies and touch a little bit the issue of the implementation of policies that should be carried out, mainly in regard to volcanic hazard mitigation and also in terms of protecting the environment and archaeological remains. Yo puedo controlar el... siguiente. So this is a drawing, a sketch of the Trans-Mexican Volcanic Belt. ¿No tienen un apuntador? Oh, okay. I like this sketch because it does not only show the main stratovolcanoes in dark black triangles, but in these small red dots, it shows the location of monogenetic volcanoes, and you can see that this volcanic arc related to a subduction zone consists mostly of monogenetic volcanoes. And they are not evenly distributed. They are, as you can see, there are areas where these red dots are clustered, and the largest cluster occurs precisely in Michoacán, and that area has been called the Michoacán-Guanajuato Volcanic Field. La verdad es que es un poco irritante que yo no pueda señalar los lugares de los que estoy hablando. There are about 3,000 of these volcanoes along the belt, and there are more than 1,000 in the Michoacán-Guanajuato volcanic field. La siguiente, por favor. So in red is shown an outline of this Michoacán-Guanajuato volcanic field. Muchas gracias. Okay, here, you can see in red the outline of the Michoacán-Guanajuato volcanic field, and you can see that the Mexican volcanic belt traverses a highland, which is under tectonic extension, and the most visible expression of this extensional tectonic regime is the occurrence of multiple lakes that occupy the tectonic grabens. The next, please. You can see this field is pretty large, 40,000 square kilometers, a well-known volcanic field in the world is the Auckland volcanic field in New Zealand. That would be about the size of this area in comparison. So this is really a very large area that is occupied by more than 1,000 volcanoes, which you can see here. And many of these are these shields, which are larger volcanoes. But there is also a stratovolcano, which is Tancítaro, which is believed to be extinct, and another stratovolcano is También. So it is not only a monogenetic field. Today they have started to coin this term distributed volcanic field. The next, please. So that's what the landscape mostly looks like. So we see that the most outstanding features are these shields. There are plenty of them. Some are rather domes, so you can call them domey shields or shieldy domes, depending on what your preference is. And in between are these smaller volcanic edifices, more than 1,000. These are all these scoria cones, many of which have associated lava fields like this one here. La siguiente. The youngest of these shields, and I think this is one of the main recent discoveries, not its occurrence, because it had been studied before by Hasenaka, but that it is so young. We were able to date that. We had a postdoc student, Oriel Cheuvel. We dated that at AD 1250. This, we also were able to determine that it is monogenetic, so it was created in one single eruption. She established that this eruption took maybe 35 years, and in these 35 years it produced 10 cubic kilometers. And that is a substantial number that converts this eruption in the most voluminous eruption in Mexico in the last 10,000 years. So this, I would say, is a major breakthrough. Next, please. La siguiente. Yeah, this is shown here. So here are listed some of the most voluminous eruptions. For example, Popocatépetl, 5,000 years ago, here's the volume, and you see El Metate surpasses by a large margin all of the others, which are mostly Plinian eruptions. And El Metate was largely an effusive eruption. La siguiente, por favor. So, over the past 15 years, we have done a lot of radiocarbon dating, especially of the younger volcanoes. And we know that in the last 1,000 years, maybe 4 eruptions occurred besides the historical ones, Jorullo and Paricutin. We have the one of El Metate that I just showed you, and we have another one, Malpaís Prieto. You can see this is a single lava flow that occurred in the year of 900. And just by this small sample of 4, you can see that these eruptions come in a great diversity, from one that has 10 cubic kilometers, and then we have 2 scoria cones with lava fields, and then one that did not produce a cone, but just a single lava flow. They are all andesitic. The next, la siguiente. Yeah, that's what I mentioned, that there's also Tancítaro, 4,000 meters high, and this is a stratovolcano believed to be extinct. There is also Tancítaro in the background. The next. And then there are very few of these phreatomagmatic constructs. Only a very small percentage of the total is phreatomagmatic, and these usually occur close to lake basins where there is sufficient groundwater available. The next. Many of these cones are aligned. You see that there's an alignment here, there's an alignment there, and this alignment is parallel to the main faulting pattern in the area. La siguiente. So there's another thing I wanted to mention here. Now, where does our knowledge of this important geologic province come from, or how did it come together? And I will start a little bit with pre-Hispanic times. At the time of the arrival of the Spaniards, there was a large empire. We don't know much about this. Mexico is a centralized country, so most of our textbooks talk about the Aztecs. But as a matter of fact, the Aztecs were never capable of conquering the Tarascans, which implies that these Tarascans must have been A, a lot of people, and B, pretty well organized to defend themselves. And despite of all of this, we do not really know much about the prehistory of Michoacán in comparison to other areas of Mexico. So the question is, what did these pre-Hispanic people that lived here in the Michoacán-Guanajuato volcanic field, what did they know about volcanoes? And the next, please. La siguiente. Patricia Larrea, she studied 2 volcanoes near Tancítaro, El Astillero and El Pedregal, and underneath the scoria fallout, we found abundant fragments of ceramics. These volcanoes were dated at AD 500 to 700, which is falls within the late classic of the archaeological time scale. So we know that in pre-Hispanic times, people living here were repeatedly directly impacted by eruptions, which they must have witnessed directly, so they must have known what kind of subsoil they were living on. No doubt about that. La siguiente. This is a so-called corn rock. They had this on display here in Morelia in the main museum maybe 15 years ago. I went there a few years ago and I didn't see it anymore. But this always has caught my attention. It said there's something, this is a fossil, blah, blah. As a matter of fact, yes, these are imprints on very fluid lava, and you can see the imprint is of the corn. So the leaves have been taken away. You don't see the imprint of the leaf, you see the imprint of of the corn. So somebody must have peeled the corn cob, and you don't only see one, you see plenty of these. And these are believed that somebody threw them as an offering into the it has to be a highly molten, very fluid material to cause this imprint. Most of the material became vaporized, but as I could see through the window of the display that a few pieces of charcoal were still in some of these hollow places. And what does this mean? This means that the pre-Hispanic people would go very close to the vent, to the site of the eruption, otherwise this would not be possible. So they must have known more than we think about these eruptions. La siguiente, por favor. Then, this is the main god of the Tarascans. His name is Curicaweri, and he is the god of fire. And I've not seen in the archaeological literature that it is the god of the volcanoes. But I have the suspicion that this god is related to volcanoes. La siguiente. Okay, now let's jump quickly to historical time. This is Jorullo. Jorullo was born not in a cornfield like Paricutin, but in a sugarcane field. Nearby was the largest sugarcane hacienda of Michoacán. And what you can see here, it has a main cone, but it essentially is an alignment of cones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they are aligned in a northeast-southwest direction, presumably parallel to the local faulting pattern, so it was a dike that fed the eruption, and associated to it is a lava flow that went towards this corner here. And the next. So to put you into perspective, Mexico didn't exist. This was the viceroyalty of New Spain, and here's where Jorullo is. These Spaniards, they forgot to build a wall, obviously. And the next. This is the gentleman that was ruling New Spain, and he was ruled by this guy, Charles III. He was an absolutist, so this is the time of the Enlightenment. What else can I say? Yeah, as an absolutist, he didn't like the church. He wanted all the power for himself. He wanted to reform. He had to fight wars against France and England. He needed money, and then he wanted to reform the mining industry, and he made a deal with the King of Saxony. He was Lutheran. He became Catholic as part of this deal, and then the King of Saxony sent mining engineers to Mexico. And the idea was to reform the mining industry, and they made suggestions, and then they built the Palacio de Minería, which is part of UNAM, in order to get this geared up. And in this context, also Alexander von Humboldt came to Mexico. The next one. Here's Alexander von Humboldt. When he came to Mexico, he was a young guy. This painting was made in Mexico City. You can see he has a uniform, This is the uniform that the Saxon mining engineers had. It was a strict hierarchy. You had in this mining hierarchy a certain status. You had a nice uniform that would distinguish you. And with this outfit, he visited the mines of Guanajuato, for example, but he was very interested in very specific topics. And one was basalts. He wanted to know about basalts. That's why he went to Hidalgo, where these basaltic columns are and the basalt flows. And when he heard from these other mining engineers that a basaltic volcano was born in Michoacán, he said, I want to see this basaltic volcano. And this is an engraving from his work, one of his works, and it shows Jorullo, so we can see here the alignment of cones. These are the lava flows, and on top are these strata that you see here. This is ash fallout that covers the lavas. And he came then up with a theory of how the volcano was born, and this theory became a theory in one of the main theories in Europe, and it was called the theory of the craters of elevation. And according, to make this theory short, according to this theory, lava rises to the surface, and it pushes up the uppermost strata like a blister, and at the end it breaks through the blister and forms then a fissure eruption like the alignment of cones that we see at Jorullo. And this theory he then extended to larger structures, and like, for example, the Mexican volcanic belt, which is on a highland. So according to that, the entire area had been upheaved like a blister, and then a fissure formed, and that's why we have the alignment of volcanoes that form the arc. And he would publish everything first in French, and he called this then L'axe néovolcanique transmexicain or something like that. That was then translated into Spanish, and since then we learn in school, este es el eje volcánico transversal. But it goes back to Humboldt and his writings in French, and to this idea of the theory of craters of elevation. The next, please. So yeah, this is the original map by Humboldt. This is the blister, and this is the alignment of cones, etc. The next, please. La siguiente. ¿Te encargo un vaso de agua? Okay, and then I had mentioned the thing with the basalts. He was very interested in basalts because at that time there was a discussion between the Neptunists and the Plutonists. And the Neptunists would say that basalts were formed by precipitation in the ocean. And because you usually would find in Germany basalts associated to marine sediments. And the English, on the contrary, were mostly Plutonists, and they said, okay, basalts are of igneous origin. And in that context of these two discussions, the Neptunists versus Plutonists, and the theory of craters of elevation, Jorullo became the second most cited volcano in the literature of the 19th century after Vesuvius. And this is, so Michoacán has been in the scientific literature, in the origins of geology and volcanology, Michoacán has been essentially in part of the discussion. And so I just wanted to mention this here that we are not really standing on completely unknown territory. La siguiente, por favor. Okay, and then the next eruption occurred. I'm not going to talk much about this because other people will during this, and we want to keep the memory going on. But in terms of scientific advancement, this was, of course, very important. Also, la siguiente. And I just want to mention this pamphlet printed by the USGS. At the time was the Second World War. There were American geologists had the permission to seek for strategic minerals in Mexico, and at that time this eruption occurred, so they could dispense some of them to go and have a look at the volcano, and they worked with people from UNAM and also with Ezequiel Ordóñez. They established collaborative work, maybe this is one of the main or one of the most important products of this collaboration, which turned out to be quite fruitful. Mr. Fries, he quit his work at the USGS and then got a PhD in Tucson. And after that, he became an employee of the Instituto de Geología at UNAM, actually. La siguiente. Yeah, and this is, probably most of you know this book. Professor Luhr, he made a very good compendium of all that was learned scientifically from the Paricutin eruption, and put it into print. This is the title of the book. The next, please. This is Professor Hasenaka. He's a Japanese citizen. He made the first inventory of all the volcanoes that occur in this area, and probably one of the most cited papers is this one, and he coined the term Michoacán-Guanajuato volcanic field that we use today. La siguiente. Okay, now essentially I'm quitting the historical part. In the last 15 years, a lot of mapping has been going on, more detailed mapping. A few quadrangles here are missing. Here in yellow is the outline of the Michoacán-Guanajuato volcanic field. So you can see that although a few advances have been made, large parts of this territory still remain essentially unmapped. So in terms of future studies, we need to finish the mapping and also the radiometric dating so that we can really establish with some certainty how this province evolved. La siguiente. So a few words in regard to the seismic swarms that have occurred recurrently during the past 2 decades. They usually last not more than 2 months. They have, you can see here the quakes, how they accumulate, they peak, but then they vanish. So the question is magma trying to make it to the surface? You can see here, this is something by the Servicio Sismológico Nacional. They spread over a wide area. We don't really have much precision on neither the depth nor the location. So it is really mandatory to improve the monitoring capabilities. The next. yeah, maybe we, well, maybe one thing I want to, there's usually a pattern to the compositional variation of the products. They start basaltic andesite, this is from Paricuti, a paper by Patricia Larrea, and they move towards more silicic compositions. Maybe we keep that in mind here now for a moment. In terms of the eruption time, they move from mafic to more silicic. The next. This is something that should be undertaken. These are these two examples of these lacustrine basins. This is Cuitzeo, this is Zacapu. There used to be a lake, but it was artificially drained. And something that is striking, they are surrounded by volcanoes, but there are no volcanoes inside. The same here. This occurs in many of these basins, surrounded by volcanoes, but inside there's nothing. So one wonders why. And I think something that should be done is deeper drilling. I would be very interested in knowing the depth of the sedimentary fill. And the sedimentary fill, as you know, it records also paleoclimate, so maybe we can join with the paleoclimate crowd and see why do volcanoes not occur here? But this would obviously require, it's kind of expensive, that several people come together and request the money for doing this. The next. Another thing that is interesting about the Michoacán-Guanajuato volcanic field is the occurrence of clusters. So the volcanoes are not distributed evenly, and then there are these clusters, and I'm only going to show you here one example. This is a map that Nancy Reyes made of a cluster on the western margin of the Zacapu Basin. It consists of 4 volcanoes. El Infiernillo, that was dated at 3,200 before present. It was followed by País Las Víboras a few hundred years later. Then around 2,000 years ago, El Capaxtiro surfaced, and the 4th eruption was the one of Malpaís Prieto around the year of 900 of our time. So these clusters, they are not only spatially clustered, but also clustered in time. And this is a recurrent phenomenon in Michoacán. And presently, Nancy and also other students of Liz Whittam are studying these in more detail. We want to understand how they come into existence. La siguiente, por favor. Maybe I skip this. I think I'm running out of time. These clusters, they also start more mafic and turn more silicic with time. They follow the same pattern as single eruptions. La siguiente. So, I always like this one. Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Although this is, those of us that have studied paleontology once in our lives, this would be a tempting conclusion. It's probably not exactly so, and that's why Liz Whittam and her students are pursuing this in more detail. Essentially, the key question here is if there are, what kind of magma bodies might be there in the crust? Are these all fed by 4 different magma batches coming from the mantle, or is there something in the crust that feeds them? Where in the crust are these magma bodies, etc. La siguiente. So, since we are here at this cluster of Zacapu, I come to another issue which is equally interesting. And this is that these areas that consist of barren rock apparently were densely inhabited. And that's a discovery that was, I mean, these archaeological sites, they have been known for a longer period of time, but what was not known is how large these settlements were. These are true, almost, I mean, we could say these were truly cities, enormous areas of these, this type of landscape were inhabited, and this was discovered by archaeologists recently, namely by Gregory Pereira and his team. They had a LiDAR image made, but there is also another person from the US, Christopher Fisher. He made that in an area, in areas of Pátzcuaro, namely the Rancho Seco volcano, and then another one near Urichu, that were also densely inhabited, and that is, I think, quite a revealing conclusion. La siguiente. So you can see the older ones, like the older lava flows, well, older means a few thousand years old, are already covered by this oak forest, but the LiDAR you can see here the archaeological remains. The LiDAR can traverse the vegetation. So on this high resolution LiDAR, you can see essentially almost every step. La siguiente. Yeah, this is this cluster of volcanoes, and these are these archaeological sites. La siguiente. You will hear in much more detail about this in the upcoming days. I suggest you to attend this special session. And this is a Google Earth image. So you see, here you can see the forest. This is the LiDAR. You can see all these structures there, and this is a processed LiDAR, where you can essentially see every single household. Well, I think this is one of the main findings in the Michoacán-Guanajuato volcanic field, and this area, or these kinds of investigations need to be carried out in much more depth in the future. La siguiente. Unfortunately, and I'm almost finishing, here again, the cluster of volcanoes, Capaxtiro, Malpaís Prieto, and here you can see Malpaís Las Víboras on a recent Google image. Something strange is happening there. La siguiente. What is this? And that was the question. What is going on there? Because this is essentially a badland. I mean, rocky substrate, completely unused, not fit for agricultural use. La siguiente. What's happening is this. They are preparing this area for planting avocados. So although it is rock, they go there with a bulldozer, they flatten everything, and then they make deep holes, put earth in it, and that is essentially the plan. And but this is barren rock, so this requires a major investment. And on these surfaces is where the archaeological sites are. So this is really unfortunate that they might get leveled by bulldozers. Archaeological sites that have been preserved because this land is not fit for agriculture. I mean, that is really the important thing here. We have these archaeological sites that are incredibly well preserved because that area was of no use, and now comes out of a sudden, comes the bulldozer, because it needs, these kinds of structures need to move around the trees to pick the fruit, and so I think that something needs to be done in this context. La siguiente. Yeah, and I mean, Mexico is the largest producer of avocados. This essentially means Michoacán. When it says here Mexico, it mainly And of course, this is a source of pride and prosperity, but there are some negative effects that need to be taken care of, in my opinion. La siguiente. And then I want to mention another thing. This is a whole ecosystem. Besides of the aesthetic beauty, this is a nearly perfect cone, but you can see there's already here some rodent shows up at night, I guess. Next. This used to be a similar one. What you see here, this is the crater floor. And so the cone has been almost entirely taken away. So maybe we should think about whether this is the best use we can give to these structures. La siguiente. Creo que ya me acabé el tiempo, ¿verdad? Well, maybe we skip this. La siguiente. La siguiente, por favor. Yeah, we can also skip this. I mean, this was like the conclusion, but I think the images spoke for themselves. The key things that I wanted to tell you, I think I did that through the images. La siguiente. Yeah. And this is, just to end, this is the owner of Paricutin, the original owner, the person that owned the cornfield on which the volcano had grown. And you can see that he was reflecting upon something, and that is what probably is we need to do during the next days, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much, Klaus. I think we'll have many days to discuss this more in details. So I think we can start with the first session. So please welcome the moderators or the conveners of this session, José Luis Arce and Rafael Torres.